Hello and welcome back to this video series. Today, like I promised in the last one, what we will be doing is writing a basic application in Delphi. So what I want you guys to do, open a new VCL project, click on Run, it will then compile our project, and there we go. We've just wrote a basic Delphi program. Thank you for watching the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. All joking aside, this is extremely boring. I mean, there's no controls on the screen, we can't do anything with this program, right? So, what we're going to want to start doing now is actually adding components to the form to then use to get user input and do fun and funky stuff, right? So for this program, what we will be doing is in our palette, we are going to be selecting a button. As you can see here, it's called T button. We can then drag and drop, or you can click on a component and then click on the form. It both work. And now we have a button on the screen, but it does absolutely nothing. So just as boring as before. But now we have something to click on. Before we get into coding, this is where we are going to start looking at properties and properties of objects. So let's say we want to change the name of our program. If we then click on the form and we go to properties, we can then see there's a option called caption. If we edit this caption, let's call this test app 1. We can see that it updates the caption of our form, and this is now the name of the form and what it's going to display when it is rendered on the computer. In that same way, we can then go and edit button. It automatically goes to caption. You can then call this click me or anything to that effect, right? So it's still boring. It doesn't do anything, but we now, if we run this, we now have a clicky thing. We can click on it, it does the animation, that's all it does so far, okay? Now, let's write some code. And in Delphi, the way that code is run is done in a specific manner. It's called event handling. At the end of this video, I will be discussing exactly how that works, or at least in a bit greater detail. But for now, any component has events that we can write code for. We can see the number of different events we can write code for in the Object Inspector under the Events tab. And all components, if you just double click on them in the design, have a default handler that it will then automatically provide you to write with. In this case, it would be for buttons, it would be the onClick. For forms, it would be the onCreate. So you get to play around a bit and find out what handlers are made automatically for you just by double clicking. But in this case, whenever you want a user to click a button and you want to write code for that, double click the button, it goes to the code view, and we can now start coding to our heart's content. This is a basic event handler. No need to worry about this first part for now. We will be covering that when we do functions. But for the sake of completeness, it is a procedure, which is just a certain type of function that we have in Delphi. This is just the name of a function. So you will see that this button one click, this will change if we then go in the design view and go and change the name property of the button. If we set this, for example, to be button click, and we update that, when we go back to the handler, it will now say button click click. Then you'll see in parameters we've got sender t object. Don't worry about this right now. This is just if we want to, for example, get some information from whichever object triggered this event. Because what we can find is you can have a button click that then also creates an event that another component then has to handle, or we can have that the mouse is the sender, and then we can query the mouse for its position on the screen and stuff like that. Don't worry about that too much now. We will cover it when we get to functions, but it's something fun to think about. Okay, then another key part is any function or any block of code in Delphi will begin with the begin tag and end with the end tag. Super obvious when I say it like that, but this is how we group code into certain functions or procedures or if statements, loops, all of it. Whenever we want to enclose groups of code or blocks of code, it will be done with the begin and end tags. Something I highly recommend is to get into a good habit of indenting your code. That just means that whenever you enter into a block of code, you tab one out, and whenever you finish a block of code, you go in back one tab. It would neatly structure your code, make it more readable, and it's then easier to identify separate or disparate blocks of code. Just something or best practices. You can decide what your style is, but please never keep everything on one level. I had a friend who did this. I wanted to slap him the entire time I saw his code. Don't ever do this. Your teacher will hate you will hate yourself, and your marks are going to show it. So for this first program, what I was thinking we could do is we could have the button click me, and when we click on it, a message then pops up in a message box that then just says hello world. It's the most basic we can probably get in Delphi. So to do this, we just use the command show message. Okay? But how do we know what message to show? In the parentheses, we then have to specify a string. If you don't know what a string is, we will cover this in the next video when we start talking about variables. But we can then just, in parentheses, open up single quotation marks, and inside the quotation marks, we can then type out the message we want to show. Hello world. We can run it. It will then compile and link, and when we click on click me, it shows a dialog box with the message hello world. Still extremely boring, but it's a step above what we could do before, and this is going to be a building block from where we can start doing more complex stuff. Now you would start asking yourself, okay, but how about if I want to take in user info like is name, age, race, gender, all of these stuff? If we want to use that in our program, how will we get that? And it's obvious you're going to add components to the form to then take in that info, but we also need some way of accessing that info inside our code. This will be handled with variables to actually store user info inside variables and to manipulate the data and to actually do some fun things with it. So I'll be covering that in a future video after we've covered variables and variable types. Okay, so I told you in the last video that any one of these properties can be changed programmatically. So what if we wanted to do something fun? So what we can do is we can go over to the events tab. There should be an option here for on mouse enter. This event gets triggered whenever the mouse moves over click me. Okay? So what we can then do here is we can then change the caption, for example. So we then have to specify the name of the object that we want to change. In this case, we called it button click. This corresponds to the name property that we set for the object in the object inspector. Then hit dot, and then we get a list of properties that we can change. So let's change the caption. Hit enter to then autocomplete after typing a bit. And now we can use colon equals. This is how we assign values in Delphi. And then we can pass it an immediate string value that it will then set to be the caption. So let's make this get off. We can then compile and run our code. When we mouse over, it changes the caption to get off. And when we click on it, we still get hello world. So this was just a simple demonstration of another event that we have access to, as well as how we can programmatically manipulate the properties of objects that are shown on the form. Okay. So at this point in time, I really want you guys to start playing around with different events and try and mess around, maybe set a few properties programmatically. You will probably break something, but don't worry, it can't break your computer, and it's just for laughs. Now, I promised you guys a bit of a better explanation as to the event system in Delphi. And what an event is whenever a user interacts with the computer, let's say he presses a button on his mouse or he's typing away at his keyboard, that generates an interrupt from the I/O device, the mouse, the keyboard, a scanner, printer, USB device, whichever, which then alerts the operating system that an event occurred and that it has to do something. The exact way that we interact with these interrupts, I won't be getting into detail with. It's an extremely interesting field of study, and if you ever decide to go further into university, you will find a bunch of info on this and probably an entire course dedicated to how we structure a computer to actually handle these events. You will probably have an entire course dedicated to how we organize and build a computer to handle these events. What then happens after we've sent the interrupt and the operating system has decided what to do with it, if it finds that that interaction was done inside our application, it will then notify our application, whereafter the application then gets to analyze the event that we triggered, and then it decides what event to broadcast. The application, so not the form, the application, which is the code that we won't be interacting with, it's the code at the lowest level of our program, will then broadcast an event. What that means is that it would say to all components in the program, listen, the user just clicked on this button with this name. And then the program will go and hand it off to an event handler, which is what we've been writing today. So we've written the button click event handler, and we've got the button mouse enter event handler over here. That handler then takes over control, it executes its code, it reaches end, it exits, and then we are back to the static form of it, where after it then resumes control and we wait for user input again. Something we will find is you also do have event handlers for the on form close. If we have a look, let's see, no, double clicking it does not work, but if we search here for on close, we then have an event handler that will be called whenever we close the application. In this case, it transpires exactly like I said, where it generates an event that it then broadcasts. The form then will catch this broadcast and start executing code, and then thereafter it will call the OS to ask it to close the application. That's the only difference here. In this case, we can see that events always work the same way. An event is caused by user interaction or by interaction with other components. Those components or the user then generates an event. That event is caught by an event handler, and thereafter that code is then executed and we return to waiting for user input. So thank you guys for watching this video. We didn't get a lot done. I mean, we talked about events, we started writing some basic code, we changed the property of a component, and we had the show message dialog. In future, in the next few videos, I will be talking about types of variables, and then we will start focusing on user input and actually manipulating user input or showing output to users. So I will see you guys in the next video, and until then, have a good one.